We're going to look at some of the things I've talked about in the previous videos and pull them together to kind of form the bigger picture. I have said that the world is created by one being, one mind, the Creator. And the Creator creates everything out of its own mind, out of its own being. And the importance of this is that from our perspective, when we are experiencing the world, we are experiencing all of these forms, different forms that are set apart from each other that appear to be quite different. But underneath all of this form is oneness. So the underlying reality behind all form is oneness, the one mind. I've also explained that the purpose of creation is that the Creator creates self-aware extensions of itself. We are created as co-creators. And the purpose is that we start out with a kind of a point-like sense of self, and we can then gradually transcend that sense of self, expanding it, raising it up so that we grasp more and more. In other words, we start out being identified with form. We live in a particular world of form, and we start out being identified with it, immersed in this world of form, maybe even thinking we are a product of this world of form. And then we gradually can raise our awareness and change our, expand our sense of identity, so we realize we are not defined by form. We are also a mind, and there is no limit to how far we can expand our mind, our sense of self. So this is the basic process that's running underneath everything. And I've explained that there were 6 spheres before ours, 6 worlds of form before ours, that they have ascended. They have been raised to a higher level by the co-creators in those spheres. But we don't need to go into all this complexity. We just need to realize that we are created in order to start out with a point-like sense of self, where we often identify ourselves with the world, the environment we are living in, and then we gradually expand it, and we can go all the way up to the Creator consciousness. So I've also explained that the very foundation for this process is free will. We have the ability to consciously raise our awareness. It's not something that happens automatically. It's not something that's predestined, that's forced upon us by God. We have the ability to consciously make choices that raise our awareness. But I've also explained that because free will needs to be allowed to outplay itself, it's possible for us to go into a state where we deny our connection to anything outside our own minds. We come to believe that our own minds are closed systems, self-validating, self-referential systems, where we can define what's real and unreal. I've said that we actually meant to gradually discover the principles that make the world work, the principles that was used to create the world and make it sustainable. That's how we fulfill our role as co-creators. But we can, because of free will, go into denying these principles and thinking that instead of discovering how the mind of God works, we have a right to deny that there is a God, deny that there is any principles, and basically put ourselves in a state of mind where we think we can define how the world should work. And I've explained especially that there's a group of people or beings that I've called fallen beings who have gone into this state of mind and who have been in it for a very long time, and they think they are very, very sophisticated and that they can define how the world works. So now the question becomes, do you think the Creator was stupid? Do you think he didn't know, or it didn't know what it was doing? Of course not. The Creator knew very well the potential that people can use their free will to deny their connection to anything outside their own minds. So what could be done then to minimize the risk that people would get lost in this and would stay in this state of denial indefinitely. And the way this was done, it's something that is subtle to grasp, and I have studied spiritual teachings for many years, and I have found very, very few teachings that actually talk about this. It's something that has generally been overlooked by most spiritual seekers. So I'm going to take a little bit of time here, and I hope you'll stay with me and ponder this explanation. So I have said in the first video in this series that the world is basically created out of two forces. I compared it to the yin and the yang of Taoism, where there's an expansive force and there's a contracting force. And if you ask yourself, why is that necessary? Well, you can say that if there wasn't an expansive force, how could anything be created? There would be no drive to create anything. So I said, for example, that in the beginning was a void. Well, why would there be anything else than the void unless there was an expansive force that wanted to create some kind of form in the void? So this is the expansive force. We can call it the Father if we want, but I prefer to just call it the expansive force to associate these roles of men and women that we have on Earth. So the expansive force, is what starts creation, drives creation. But now if you think about an expansive force that acts alone, what would it do? It would just keep expanding, right? So how would any form then be sustained? You could say that you take the idea of the Big Bang that scientists have been promoting for a long time now. Supposedly there was, at one point, 13.5 billion years ago, there was a singularity. All matter and all energy was compressed into this one point. I'm going to set aside that this is extremely unlikely and nobody can explain what a singularity is, but nevertheless. Then they say that at some point an expansion started, and there was just an outgoing force that started the Big Bang. It's like an explosion, right? But when you think about a house that's being blown up, do you ever see that the house spontaneously starts assembling itself again? No, and an explosion is an outgoing force. So even if there was a Big Bang 13.5 billion years ago, how do we explain that there are actually forms that are now sustainable, that have existed for billions and billions of years, like galaxies? And that is because the expanding force is balanced by the contracting force. So there is expansion that creates a new form, but the expansion is balanced by the contracting force so that the form can be sustained over time. It can be sustained indefinitely or for all eternity, but it can be sustained over time. And this is the balance between these two forces that allows our world of form, whether it's planet Earth or the entire universe, to exist over time. However, the expanding force is expansive. The contracting force is contracting. What determines the exact balance that causes our world of form to exist? Scientists have discovered in the last several decades that there are certain cosmological constants, they call it, certain ratios. The force of gravity has a certain strength. If it was a little bit less, the world couldn't exist. If it was a little bit more, the world couldn't exist. Many of these cosmological constants. So what creates this balance, this particular balance? And what creates it is that there is something else that balances the expansive and the contracting force. And that something else is a state of mind. And it's basically a state of mind that has one function, and that is to always give the possibility of seeing the oneness between form and the source of form. You can explain it in various ways, but let's explain it from our viewpoint, right? I've said that we live in a world of form. We start at the 48th level of consciousness. We can expand our sense of connection to something outside our minds by going up towards the 144th level. Or we can go down below the 48th and go into the illusion that we are separate beings. So if we do go up from the 48th level, what is it that allows us to go up? What is it that allows us to expand our connection? Well, it is this one unifying mind. Because we can realize that even though we are in a world of form, we are more than the world of form. We are more than the outer mind, the outer personality, the physical body, and we can then expand our sense of our consciousness, raise our consciousness by using this mind that unifies everything. We attain a greater union with our higher self by using the mind that is meant to unify. In other words, there's a unifying mind. So then I've said we can go below the 48th level, go into separation. And how do we do that? Well, we do that, of course, by using a mind that is based on separation, separating. It's the opposite of the unifying mind. And here's an important distinction to make. The unifying mind is created by the Creator. It's integral to creation. But the separate mind is not created by the Creator. It doesn't have any independent existence. It doesn't have to exist. It's something that beings create when they go into separation. In other words, it's a consequence of free will and a specific use of free will that we have this separate mind. And so when we go into separation, we are starting to use this separate mind to deny oneness. And the step from the 48th level to the 47th level seems like not such a big step, and the step from the 47th to the 46th is not such a big step. But for each step we go down, we are adding this illusion based on denial, the denial of oneness. And when we go to the lowest level that's possible on Earth, we have gone quite far into this separation, into this labyrinth, into this maze that we create based on these decisions we make. And as I've said, we use the duality consciousness, and therefore we can validate anything and we can invalidate anything. Anything that, whatever we want to believe, whatever worldview we have, we can validate it by denying all contrary evidence, because we can use the mind of separation to deny anything that we don't want to believe. So, from a certain perspective, it would seem there's no way out of this. Once we go into separation, there's no way out of it. But this is, of course, what the Creator foresaw. So, even though we are going down into separation, we are not actually going outside of the unifying mind, because there can be nothing outside the unifying mind. There can be nothing outside a unifying mind. We can in our minds create the illusion that we are separate, but in reality we are not separate. What we're doing when we go into separation is like a fish swimming in the ocean and denying that it's wet. We are denying that we are immersed in the unifying mind, the unifying consciousness. But that denial can only be upheld in our minds, and the lower we go in consciousness, the more effort it takes to uphold the denial. That's why we can eventually come to a point where we just get tired of it, we just have enough of it. So what I'm saying is that even though going below the 48th level means creating gradually more and more elaborate illusions that deny oneness, this can only be done because we are using the mind of oneness to deny oneness. Because what are we using to deny oneness the mind, right? But there is only one mind. So whether we go into separation or not, we can only use that one mind. Now I know this can be tricky to grasp, but let me try and give an example here. If you're reading a book, why are you reading that book? Well, you want to get a certain experience from reading that book. Perhaps it's a novel, you want to be entertained, you want to be excited, you want to be diverted from your normal life. Perhaps it's a non-fiction book and you want to learn something. But you are reading the book because you want to get something out of it. And this means that when you're reading a book, you're focusing on the letters. And your mind is putting the letters together in words. And the words are then translated into some kind of meaning in your mind that gives you a certain experience. But you can see that two people can read the same book and they can have a different experience. As I've said before, two people can look at the arguments for God's existence and the arguments against, and they can come up with completely opposite conclusions. And they are both convinced that their explanation is real. So what we see is that there's the words that are used in a book, but the words always have to be interpreted. And it's actually this interpretation that makes it possible to have different experiences from reading the book. And this is the mind of separation that allows people to have different experiences. But now consider something that most of us don't ever think about when we're reading a book. How can the book exist? We have black letters on a white page. If there was no page, where would the letters appear? In other words, behind all of the different forms of the words and the letters, there's the white page. There has to be something upon which the letters can be printed. If you go to a movie theater, there has to be a white screen upon which the movie can be projected. But when the movie is being projected, you don't see the white screen. You're focused on the movie. But the white screen is still there. And without the white screen, there could be no movie. Now, I've said the same thing here with the material universe. We have a basic form of energy. Everything is made out of energy. And the energy takes on different forms depending on the mental images projected upon it. But even beyond the energy that makes up form, there is this unifying mind. There has to be some backdrop upon which form can appear. Form is specific, and one form is set apart from another. A circle is different from a square. But there has to be something upon which form can appear. And that something is the unifying mind. And here is the conclusion of this. You cannot create anything without the unifying mind. You can create a very elaborate illusion based on the mind of separation that denies oneness. This is what the fallen beings have been trying to do since they fell back in the fourth sphere, some of them. And they can be very, very elaborate. It can seem very, very real. But the only reason you can create this illusion is because you have a mind. And that mind is the one mind. You cannot create anything without the one mind. And what does that mean? It means no matter how elaborate of an illusion you could ever create in separation, you can always reconnect to the one mind. I've talked about fallen beings who go to the lowest level of consciousness that's possible on Earth. There are even some that have gone lower than that, which means they can't take embodiment on Earth, but they can exist in the emotional, mental, and identity realms. And it may seem as if these people have gone so far into separation that there's no way back for them. But there is. Because no matter what illusions they have created, even at the very lowest level of consciousness possible on earth, there is still the one mind that can offer you an alternative to the illusion. A frame of reference that allows you to see, experience, there's more to know, there's more to understand, there's more to experience than the illusion. You could not create an illusion that was absolute. This is what the fallen beings don't grasp. They are on this endless pursuit of creating the absolute illusion, or rather, the absolute worldview of how the world works. But you cannot create anything that is absolute, because everything we create in the mind is relative to this one mind. And that means that no matter where we are at, we always have a way out. We always have a way up. We always have a way to transcend our current illusion, our current sense of self. But of course, this is subject to free will. How can we connect to the one mind? Only by being open to it, to open to something beyond our present sense of self, our present illusion. Only by being willing to, in a way, question the illusion, but at least question, is there more? Is there more to grasp? Is there more to understand? Is there more to experience? Is there more to see? Because what the unifying mind does is, it gives you a frame of reference, that there's something beyond your current state of mind. And this, for that matter, continues all the way up beyond the 48th level to the 144th level of consciousness. The unifying mind offers you an alternative, a frame of reference compared to your present state of consciousness. And this is what can be very difficult to grasp, and many spiritual students haven't grasped it. I even see many spiritual teachers who haven't grasped it. So let me try and explain this in another way. We know that, or at least most spiritual people, I assume, are aware that there are different ages, there are different progressions, different cycles. And I think most spiritual people are probably aware that the last 2,000 years is called the age of Pisces. This is not based on astrology, but on the astronomical progression of the equinoxes in the sky. The star constellations move in a certain pattern, in certain cycles. So the last 2,000 years was the age of Pisces. The next 2,000 years is going to be the age of Aquarius. And each age has certain characteristics. And basically, the way I have explained this is that everything is a progression. So for each of these ages, humankind on Earth, we have the opportunity to learn certain lessons, to raise our collective awareness to a certain point. And this means that at the beginning of a spiritual cycle, there's often a specific spiritual teacher that is sent to Earth to kind of start the next cycle. And the spiritual teacher that was sent to Earth to start the age of Pisces was Jesus. And I know that many spiritual people are reluctant to even consider Jesus because they sense the hypocrisy and the fallacy of Christianity. And this is perfectly valid. Christianity has departed so far from Jesus' teachings that it's almost unbelievable. But that's not really the topic of this discussion here. What I want to focus on is that Jesus was the one who was sent by the Ascended Masters into embodiment. And what was the purpose? Well, the purpose was actually that Jesus would demonstrate how to walk the spiritual path that leads us from the state of separation towards the state of oneness. He was meant to demonstrate this in his own life. And if you look for clues, you can actually find some in the scriptures that demonstrate this. Of course, official Christianity, when the Roman Catholic Church was formed in 325 or 381, however you want to define it, they deviated from this. They actually the fallen beings, to be honest, took over the Christian religion and turned it into a false religion because they elevated Jesus to the status of being an exception. He was the only Son of God, the only begotten Son of the Father. And thereby they destroyed him as an example and turned him into an exception. Nobody can follow him. It's blasphemy to think you can follow in Jesus' footsteps. But the reality is that a spiritual teacher is always meant to replicate himself or herself. You know, you gather students and you raise them up to the same level of consciousness that you had, or perhaps even a higher level, and then they go out and spread the teaching. So really what was meant to happen was that throughout the age of Pisces, people would incarnate over many lifetimes and they would gradually raise their consciousness above the 96th level and towards the 144th level. And thereby, instead of having just one person who represented the Christ consciousness, there would be millions of people who represented some level of Christ consciousness. So you can't idolize them all. But this didn't happen, partly because many people didn't grasp what Jesus was about, and partly because of the fallen beings took over the Christian religion and then used the Christian religion to basically suppress any alternative view. You can see that throughout the Middle Ages, how the Catholic Church, the Inquisition, the Crusades, all of these things suppressed any alternative view. They suppressed the true teachings of Christ, actually. So, based on this, Christ was actually meant to be a universal term. But because of what happened with Christianity, it's become a sectarian term. But I'm going to use it here as a universal term just to illustrate that consciousness of oneness. The Christ consciousness is actually just one name. It's not the only name, but it's one name for this unifying consciousness that unifies the Creator and its creation, so that the self-aware beings who are part of the Creator's creation can trace their origin back to the Creator. And one word for that is the Christ consciousness. You also call it the Christian consciousness, the Buddha nature, infinite awareness, pure awareness. But let's just use this because there are some clues we can take up from the Old Testament. So, here's a quote from the Gospel of John, first chapter. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. The same was in the beginning with God. All things were made by Him, and without Him was not anything made that was made. Now think about what I just said. In the beginning was the Word. Now, the Greek word that's often translated as word is actually logos. And logos means the unity, a wholeness. So you could say in the beginning was wholeness, the consciousness of wholeness, the consciousness that was meant to unify everything. But we can also use the word because what is it we do as human beings when we define everything? We use words. An apple is different from an orange. A triangle is different from a square. So, in order to relate to the world of form, describe the world of form, we are using words. Words that describe a different form. But the word is not the form. We know this, although we rarely think about it. As I've used a previous example, if somebody had used the word apple about the sun, well, we would have been thinking that we were walking under the apple and eating a sun, for example. So, words are just descriptions. But how can words exist? How come we have different words? Does it not seem logical that the idea that we could create sounds and turn them into words and create letters that represent these sounds and put them together to words that give meaning, does it not seem logical that they come out of a certain mind, a certain mindset, a certain consciousness? So, words come out of the Word, the unifying consciousness. So, by the very fact that we can use words, there is something that's the source of words. And that source ties all words together. Whatever words you are using to describe a form, you can go beyond the words. Experience there is a reality beyond the words, that the words describing the form are not complete. It's not everything there is to understand about the form. And what do I mean with that? Well, what I have explained in previous videos is that creation, at least in our sphere, has 4 levels. There's the identity level, where the energy, the pure energy that comes from our higher self, is given some form by the sense of identity we have. The ideas, the matrices, even the words we have in our identity minds. Then the energy descends to the mental, where it is given a more concrete form by the images and the words that we have there. And then into the emotional, where it's given momentum and then projected into the physical, projected on the matter light. So we are using words to describe forms, to define forms in our minds, and to communicate, of course, with each other. So words are an integral part of co-creation, and we are using words to describe any form. Even before we manifest a form, we are using words to describe what we want to manifest. And this means that when we go into separation, we lose the awareness that words are just words. We start to believe that the word is the thing. And we start to identify with the words. And therefore, we are using words now to define differences. For example, you have many people in the world, many groups of people who have a very strong sense of national identity, racial identity, ethnic identity, sexual identity, and they are using words to describe themselves as being different from, maybe even in opposition to, other people. And as I've explained with the duality consciousness, you can validate anything, you can invalidate anything. That means that if you're only looking at the level of the words, you cannot come up with an argument in words that will help somebody escape their state of mind. Well, this took me probably 40 years to grasp, because when I was young, and for the first many years on my path, I really seriously believed, whatever people believe, whatever illusion they're into, it should be possible to come up with a worded statement that would awaken them from that illusion. And I also thought that if I can't come up with the argument, there's something wrong with me. But the reality is, it's impossible. People have used words to define themselves as separate beings. And they had then projected onto those words, as I said, the sense of reality. This is real. These words are really real. They're describing how the world is. Their description is the thing in their minds. You cannot come up with any worded statement that counteracts this, because they will just deny it. They'll just sweep it aside. Oh, it's not real. I don't believe that. I don't need to listen to that. I don't need to consider that. So you can't. It's impossible. Right? And that's why there is no spiritual teaching that can awaken everybody on the planet. It's not a matter of finding the absolute truth or the highest spiritual teaching that will awaken everybody. Can't be done. The only thing that can awaken people is the Word, the Christ consciousness. And it's not that the Christ consciousness can't be expressed in words, but it can't be defined by words. So the Christ consciousness is more than the words. That's why I've said you have all of the arguments for God's existence. But there are no absolutes there. They won't make everybody who reads the arguments believe that God exists, because you can always deny. So you realize that the Christ consciousness is more than words. It's a state of mind, it's a state of consciousness, it's an energy, it's a vibration. It can be projected through words, released through words, but if people just look at the level of the words, it can't touch them. They will deny it. You look at the fact that Jesus walked the earth, and he had attained a very high level of Christ consciousness. And everything he said was endowed with this Christ consciousness. There was a certain spirit in the words. But you see how many people who met him, they ignored him. Oh, they saw nothing special about him. And the scribes and the Pharisees, they argued against him. They used the doctrines of the Jewish religion to argue against the living Christ in embodiment. But there were people that were converted by Jesus, if you want to use that word. But they were actually awakened. They were awakened by experiencing something from him that was more than their normal state of consciousness. But this was not the words he was saying. It was the consciousness, the mind, the energy that he was radiating. And that can awaken people, if they're open to it. But if they're not, they'll just ignore it. They won't even see it. So this is important to grasp. And here's another quote from the New Testament. It's actually from Matthew chapter 16. There's a situation where Jesus is asking his disciples what people are saying about him. Who do they say that I am? And they say various things. And then he finally says, well, who are you saying that I am? And here's the quote. And Simon Peter answered and said, Thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God. And Jesus answered and said unto him, Blessed art thou, Simon Bar-Jonah, for flesh and blood hath not revealed it unto thee, but my Father which is in heaven. So these are, of course, specific words that Jesus used 2,000 years ago in a specific cultural context in the Middle East. Right? But you could just as well use the words that I have used here. The Father which is in heaven is the Christ consciousness, the unifying mind. And flesh and blood is a symbol for what I've talked about, the words, and the consciousness of separation. You know, flesh and blood has not revealed it unto thee. In other words, the consciousness of separation cannot reveal to anybody that Jesus has a higher level of consciousness, because they can't see it. And the Father which is in heaven is the Christ consciousness, the universal Christ consciousness. And this is something that takes a little bit of understanding. So you have the concept, which is promoted by the Christians. You find it in the Nicene Creed from 381, that Jesus was the only Son of God. Right? And this is even what Peter says. Thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God. Well, Peter doesn't say the only Son, but that's what the Christians say, the Catholics say. And they even talk about the only begotten Son. Well, the way to understand this, the symbolism here, is that the unifying consciousness, which was the first thing that the Creator created before it started creating specific forms, this is the only begotten Son of the Father. The unifying consciousness is the only begotten Son of the Father. But Jesus had come to a point where he had started unifying with that Christ consciousness. So what this means is that there is a universal Christ consciousness. It's universal. It is not tied to any particular person on earth or anything in the world of form. It's universal. But a person on earth, a self-aware being, a co-creator, can, as I said, rise higher than the 48th level, rise beyond the 96th level, and start having greater and greater sense of union with its higher self and with something even beyond the higher self, the universal Christ mind. So as an individual being, an embodiment on earth, you can unify with the universal Christ mind to the point where you are so unified with it that you become a personalization of it. You are personifying the universal Christ mind here on earth. It doesn't mean that you have now become the only Son of God, because all other people have the same potential, and the primary mission of Jesus was to demonstrate the potential that we all have. So to say that Jesus is the only Son of God is a deliberate misconstruction created by the fallen beings in order to deny that any of us could do what Jesus did. They want to destroy Jesus as an example. So the reality is that you start out, and if you look at Jesus, in the beginning of his mission, he consistently called himself the Son of Man. Only later did he acknowledge himself as a Son of God, not as the only Son. He never used the expression he was the only Son of God. But the progression is that you can start out as a Son of Man, raise your consciousness towards the 144th level, and then you realize who you are. You realize you are a Son of God because you are out of the Creator. You're not really a S-O-N of God because the sex of the physical body doesn't matter. Both men and women can, of course, be Christed beings and can raise their awareness. You are an S-U-N of God because you are radiating the light. And actually, if we go back to the Gospel of John, it says, "In him was life, and the life was the light of men." In other words, the universal Christ mind is life. And this is what gives life to us as individual beings. The universal Christ mind gives us life, gives us light, gives us awareness. And then it says, "And the light shineth in darkness, and the darkness comprehended it not." So the light is shining in the darkness. Where's the darkness? In people's minds. But the darkness, the anti-Christ consciousness, the separation consciousness, cannot comprehend the unity of the Christ mind. Okay, so now comes the really tricky part. The really, really tricky part. And let's just look at what it says in Matthew, because there's actually an important clue here. Well, okay, let's just first finish this, the first part of the quote. So Jesus says, "Flesh and blood hasn't revealed it to thee, but my Father which is in heaven." And then he says, "And I say unto thee that thou art Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. And I will give unto thee the keys of the kingdom of heaven. And whoever thou shalt bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whoever thou shalt loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven." Okay, so this is what the Catholics have used to say that Peter was the primary disciple of Jesus, and Jesus gave unto him the keys to the kingdom of heaven. And because Peter was the first pope, and because the Catholic Church is built on this succession of popes from all the way back to Peter, except for the couple of hundred years where there was no popes, then they have the authority. They have the keys to the kingdom, and only through the Catholic Church can you enter the kingdom of heaven. But this is a complete fallacy, completely against what Jesus meant. Again, everything is a symbol, right? Nothing is specific to one person. What Jesus is talking about with Peter is not specific to one person. It's a general principle, and the principle is this, as I said, no matter how far you've gone into separation, you can, as I've explained, the conscious you can step outside of your sense of self and experience the Christ consciousness. This is an ability you can never lose. And it is upon this ability that Jesus will build his church. The ministry of Christ is based on people activating their ability to recognize Christ, to recognize that there is something beyond their current state of consciousness. This is the rock upon which Jesus will build his church. Our ability, but it requires willingness, and requires willingness to experience that there's more than your current state of mind. That's basically what it is. There is more. But here comes the tricky part. No matter what state of mind you are in on earth, there is always more. You can be deep in separation. You may be absolutely convinced that you have created a worldview that defines how the world works. But there is more. You go to the 48th level. There is more, because now you sense you're connected to something outside your own mind. But you go to the 96th level, there's still more. You go to the 144th level, and you have now reached the highest level of consciousness you can reach on earth. But there is more, because you can ascend. And when you have ascended, there is still more, because you can keep rising up until you reach the Creator consciousness. Okay, so what is it that those who go into duality have done? They have taken the universality of the Christ mind and made it specific. And then they have said, this specific form, this mindset we have created, this world we have created, is absolute. This is the symbol of the crucifixion. It's not just Jesus who was crucified. We are all crucified. But what is crucifying us? Our own minds. We are the conscious you. That is the core of your being. The conscious you cannot be trapped in any sense of identity. But it can be crucified by your outer mind, the 4 levels of your mind, the identity, mental, emotional, and physical. You are crucified because in your mind you have a view of who you are and who you are not, and you think it's absolute. So, here is the essence of what the Christ is all about. The Christ is the one sent, the only begotten Son of the Father, who is coming to free us from our identification with form. We can experience that state of mind by the conscious you going outside of our current sense of self. Then we experience there is more than our current sense of self. But here comes the tricky part. Once we have had the experience that there's something more, what are we going to do with it? And here's again where there's an example in the scriptures that can help us grasp this. So, Jesus begins to talk to his disciples. It's actually in the following verses in Matthew. And for some reason, the Catholic Church never talk about this, what's coming after. They always talk about, Jesus says to Peter, "You're the rock, and upon this rock will I build my church." But they never read the following verses, like they have just overlooked them conveniently. So here comes it. Jesus is starting to tell his disciples that he's going to have to go to Jerusalem, and he will suffer many things of the elders and the chief priests and the scribes, and he'll be killed, and he'll rise again. Then Peter took him, and Peter is taking Jesus, and began to rebuke him, saying, "Be it far from thee, Lord, this shall not be unto thee." But he turned and said unto Peter, "Get thee behind me, Satan. Thou art an offense to me, for thou savorest not the things that be of God, but those that be of men." Now, this is pretty direct. This is pretty stern. I mean, you can even sense in the words how this rebuke was total. It was absolute. There's no leeway here. Get thee behind me, Satan. So what is Satan? Well, Satan is another name for what I've called the duality consciousness, the separate mind, the mind of Antichrist. And what have I said this mind does? It uses the universal Christ mind to define a form, a worldview, as absolute. In other words, it's trying to pull the universal Christ mind into a specific form and encage it, imprison it in that form by now saying this form is absolute. And therefore, when I have a form that's absolute, I don't need to transcend myself. I don't need to look for more. But as I said, the main function of the Christ mind is to show that whatever we create with our free will, whatever sense of self we create, there's always more. And this is what the consciousness of Satan denies. Incidentally, well, let's just put that aside for now. Let's stay with this. So, thou savest not the things that be of God, but those that be of men. What Jesus is saying is, you are not willing to continue to look for the Christ mind. You are wanting to take the Christ mind and encage it in form and validate that form. This is where Jesus failed. He had experienced the reality of Jesus. But you see what it says here. Peter took him and began to rebuke him, saying it, be it far from thee, Lord, this shall not be unto thee. What does that mean? It means that even though Peter has experienced that Jesus is in a higher state of consciousness than himself, Peter still believes that with his state of consciousness, he is able to define how the Christ should be and what should or shouldn't happen to the Christ in this world. This is the consciousness of Satan. This is the consciousness of duality and separation. This is the consciousness of Antichrist. You see, Peter recognizes there's something about Jesus. But then he goes into his mind and he twists it around and saying, oh, because I recognize that Jesus is special, this means I'm special. This means I'm now right. My worldview is right. And therefore I can even tell Jesus what should or shouldn't happen to him. That's why I said before that you go into separation by forming a worldview with words. And there's no statement in words, specific words, that can counteract this. And that's why the Christ consciousness is not about finding this absolute truth that counteracts all the lies. Because as soon as something is expressed in words, it can be argued for or against. It can be denied. It can be flat out denied. So you need to look beyond the words and reach for the Word, the Christ consciousness, the one mind. And then you see that at any level of consciousness, there's more than your present worldview. There is more than your present sense of self. It's not just a matter of describing this with words. It's a matter of experiencing it. Experiencing that more, that self-transcendence. I know people who have been on the spiritual path for a long time. They've been in Ascended Master teachings. But they still think that having the Christ consciousness or having Christ discernment means that you can always formulate the truth in words. You can always come up with a higher statement in words. But it's really not about that. It's a matter of going beyond words and connecting to that universal Christ mind. And we all have the potential to do this. But do we have the understanding, the awareness that this is what we need to do if we want to be free? And are we willing to be free? You see the example of Peter. He was one of Jesus' disciples. He walked with him for 3 years and experienced him do all of these things. But yet when Jesus is arrested in Jerusalem towards the end of his mission, what does Peter do? He denies him 3 times. And then Jesus goes to Rome. And now the Romans are executing the Christians. And Peter is about to be crucified. What does Peter do? The last thing Peter does, he demands to be crucified upside down because he is not worthy to be equal with Jesus, who was crucified right side up. In the very end, Peter denies his Christ potential. And that is why the Catholic Church, from its inception, is based on this denial of the Christ potential in every human being. And this is the consciousness of Satan. The consciousness of Satan, the consciousness of Antichrist, denies that Christ is in everyone. That is why the fallen beings, when they took over, or when they created the Catholic Church, elevated Jesus to the status of being an exception, thereby denying. They are saying, okay, we would have preferred that we could have denied that the Christ could ever come into embodiment. They would much have preferred this, that nobody can attain the Christ consciousness, because there's no alternative to duality and separation. But here was Jesus. We thought we could destroy this religion, but there are too many followers, we can't destroy it. So what do? Well, if you can't beat them, join them. So the fallen beings said, okay, let's take over the Christian religion, and let's elevate Jesus to the status of being an exception, so we acknowledge that there was one Christed being that walked the earth in a physical body. But in so doing, we are denying that there could be anybody else ever who would walk the earth in the Christ consciousness. You see what they have done? Totally denying that Jesus could be an example. But so, what is the reality here, and which Jesus has actually explained through several of the books that I have published and the websites, is that all human beings have the potential to walk the path towards higher levels of consciousness. And as you walk that path, you become more and more unified with the universal Christ mind. You are personifying the universal Christ mind in you. And when you go above the 96th level, that's when you really start, growing towards Christhood, but also expressing your Christhood in everything you do or say. And Jesus has explained that right now, there are 10,000 people in embodiment on earth who have the potential to manifest Christ consciousness. There are many, many millions more who have the potential to manifest a high degree of Christ consciousness in this lifetime. And this is Jesus' original plan. When Jesus came into his last embodiment, he has of course been an embodiment before, but when he came into his last embodiment on earth, there were 10,000 beings who volunteered to embody with him. They were not all embodied in Palestine. They didn't all meet Jesus physically. But they had reached a fairly high level of consciousness, and they volunteered to embody at that time in order to support his mission by being an embodiment, by pulling up on a collective consciousness. And the vast majority of these beings have volunteered to stay in embodiment for the past 2,000 years and work on attaining higher and higher degrees of Christ consciousness, so that we could be an embodiment at this specific time to help that despite the odds, Jesus could have the success of his mission. Because as I said, the biggest hindrance to the success of Jesus' mission is actually Christianity, specifically the Catholic Church. And this is the fallen beings trying to do everything they could to destroy Jesus as an example. And just look what they did. Catholic Church became the official state religion in the 4th century, and up until the Middle Ages, they had a stranglehold on the life, the intellectual, the mental, the spiritual life of much of the world. And what they did was suppress anything that contradicted, challenged, or questioned the official doctrine. And the official doctrine is, of course, completely out of touch with the reality of Christ. And what Jesus would say to that official doctrine is, "Get thee behind me, Satan. Thou art an offense to me, Because thou savorest not the things that be of God, but the things that be of men, or rather, the fallen beings. And so, the reality here is that the very religion that claims to represent Christ on earth is actually entirely taken over by the mind of Antichrist. And they think they can define who Jesus was, how he was, what his mission was, what he's doing, even to the point where some Christians believe that if you declare Jesus to be your Lord and Savior, you're guaranteed to be saved after this lifetime, no matter who you are and what I've done. I was once talking to a fundamentalist Christian in the United States, and his father had a big ministry and had a TV station, and he had grown up in this environment. And I said to him, so are you telling me that if Adolf Hitler had sincerely confessed Christ on his deathbed, then Hitler would have gone to heaven? And the guy looked like I've hit him in the forehead with a hammer, because he'd never thought about this. And then he started saying, well, based on everything I was brought up to believe, I would have to say that's so. But you could clearly see he didn't believe it, because it doesn't make any sense. So anyway, this is just an example of how far some Christians have taken Jesus' teachings and disinterpreted them through the consciousness of Satan, the consciousness of Antichrist. So, what's the whole point of this talk? Well, the point is, of course, to help you realize that you might very well be one of those 10,000, or at least one of the millions that have volunteered to be an embodiment for these past 2,000 years, because you want to be here at this specific time where we are transitioning from the age of Pisces to the age of Aquarius. And there can be two outcomes, or two reasons for this. One is you can feel very close to Jesus, and you want to see that at the end of the Piscean age, Jesus' true teachings and true mission is actually known to more and more people, so that Jesus can get that success of his mission to copy himself with at least 10,000 people. The other can be that you are very close to Saint Germain, who is the Ascended Master, who is going to be the main master for the age of Aquarius. And he has plans to manifest a golden age, and therefore you are here to help receive the ideas that will manifest that golden age. And there can be many aspects of this. But what I'm hoping to show here is that if you are a spiritual person, then it's extremely important to understand what I have just explained about the Christ consciousness and the universality of it. Because many spiritual people I met over the past 47 years, we have various problems with Christianity, but we also have a problem separating Christ from Christianity. And therefore many times we just ignore Jesus. But every age builds on the previous age. You can't really enter the Aquarian age mindset if you haven't at least grasped the essence of the Piscean mindset and the challenge of the Piscean mindset. And what is the challenge of the Piscean mindset? It is to lock into the fact that there is a reality beyond any sense of reality we can create on earth. All of these religions, ideologies, scientific materialism, all of the thought systems, there is more to grasp about life. There is more to understand, but we can only grasp it, not through words, not through coming up with more elaborate theories, but by connecting to the one mind, the unifying mind, the Christ mind. This is the only way we are going to take humanity, the earth, higher. This is also the way it's happened. I mean, look at the immense progress that has happened over the past 2,000 years. But then look at the fact that we have now used the mind of separation to create all of this technology, which is clearly based on separation. Look at technology today, right? Science, scientific materialism, is based on the idea that we are separate beings. We are separate from the environment. We are separate from our source beyond, because there's nothing beyond the material universe. And as I've said before, the illusion of separation is, I can kill you, but I don't die if I do so. I can do something to you, it doesn't affect myself. That's why we have a situation where we have enough nuclear weapons, we can destroy the planet 3 times over. We have created pollution that affects the environment that may actually threaten the survival of the human race. And so we can really see here that this shows us the destructive potential of the mindset of Satan, the mindset of Antichrist, the mindset of separation. And the only way out, the only way to transcend this, is to connect to the mind that unifies us. It unifies us with each other as human beings. It unifies us, first of all, with our source. And we realize if we all came from the same source, we are all connected. But if the planet we live on also is an expression of the same source, then we are also connected to the environment. And that means we can now raise our consciousness, and based on the Christ consciousness, the consciousness of oneness, we can start discovering technology that is not force-based. Which means we can now, as I said in the first talk, start supplying our energy needs without polluting the environment. And this is an aspect of the Christ consciousness. So it's not that science is an antithesis to religion. No, materialism is an antithesis to oneness. But science is actually a process sponsored by Saint Germain that is meant to take us closer to oneness by studying the world. And then mysticism is the alpha aspect of it, the alpha and the omega, that's meant to take us closer to oneness by connecting inside our own minds to our source. And that connection comes through the Christ consciousness. So I hope this has given you a different perspective. And I hope especially you've begun to grasp that the Christ mind is not about coming up with some ultimate statement made by words. The Christ mind is about connecting to something that can't be confined to words. The word is more than words.